Let me tell you about a Sunday afternoon back in February, a year and a half ago. I'm standing in a funeral home in Waverly, Ohio, wearing the same Navy suit I've worn to 11 funerals in the last 9 years. I know it's 11 because I started keeping count, not on purpose at first. It just became a number I couldn't stop tracking, the way you can't stop touching a sore tooth. That Sunday, it was Harold Biggins, who I'd known since 1961, since we were both 20 something men working the line at the same plant, since he was the best man at my wedding and I was the best man at his. Harold was the last one, the last man standing from the group of six of us who used to sit at the same table at the Elks Lodge every Thursday night for close to 50 years. 6 men, then five, then four. Then I stood in that funeral home and did the arithmetic I'd been dreading since 1978, and the number came out to zero. I'm 84 years old, and I drove home from Harold's funeral to a quiet house, and I sat down in my recliner, and for the first time in my whole life, I understood what the word alone actually means. Not lonely in the ordinary sense. Alone in the sense that the entire generation of people who knew who I was as a young man, who could finish my sentences because they'd heard me tell the same stories 40 times, every single one of them was gone, and I was the only one left holding the memories. Now, let me tell you where I am today. Right this moment, I'm sitting on a small concrete porch in a barangay outside Bacolod City on the island of Negros in the Philippines. It's just past 5 in the afternoon, and the heat has finally started to loosen its grip on the day. There's a mango tree in the yard that isn't mine, but might as well be, because the family who owns the house lets me pick from it whenever I want. Down the lane, I can hear a basketball bouncing on cracked concrete and somebody's grandmother yelling at somebody's grandson to come eat before it gets dark. A woman named Davina, who is 31 years old and who I did not know existed 2 years ago, just walked past my porch with a plate covered in foil and said, Lolo Walt, dinner. Like that's just a normal thing that happens. Like I have always belonged here. My name is Walter Pemberton. Everyone here calls me Lolo Walt, which means Grandpa Walt, and I am 84 years old. And I have more people who would notice if I didn't show up somewhere tomorrow than I've had in the last 15 years combined. Same lonely old man, completely different life. I want to back up, though, because none of this makes sense if I just drop you into the middle of it. I grew up in Pike County, Ohio, and I spent 41 years working for the Postal Service, first as a carrier and then behind a counter, the kind of job where you know everybody's name and everybody knows yours. I married a woman named Ruth in 1965. We had 39 years together before her heart gave out on a Tuesday morning in 2004 while she was watering her tomato plants. I found her out there. I don't need to describe what that does to a man. I'll say this much. After Ruth died, my friends were the thing that kept me upright. Harold and the boys at the Elks Lodge. My neighbor, Dale Whitfield, who I'd cut grass with in some unspoken competition for 30 years. My cousin Marion, who I talked to on the phone every single Sunday of my adult life. A whole web of people who had known me since before I was old, who remembered who I used to be. And one by one, that web came apart. Marion went first, cancer, in 2011. Dale had a stroke in 2015 and passed in 2019. Church friends moved to be near their kids or simply stopped coming because they couldn't drive anymore. And then I couldn't drive much myself, not at night. And then it was just the Thursday table, getting smaller every year until that February Sunday when I did the math and got to zero. I want you to understand something because I think people my age don't say it enough. When you outlive your friends, you don't just lose company. You lose your witnesses. You lose the only people on earth who remember the version of you that existed before you were old. My daughter Patricia loves me. She calls every week from Columbus. But Patricia was born in 1968. She never knew me at 25, laughing too loud at the lodge, dancing badly with Ruth at somebody's wedding. Harold knew that man. And when Harold died, that man died a second time, quietly, with nobody left to remember him. That's the part nobody warns you about getting old. It isn't really about your own body slowing down. It's about becoming the last copy of a book that nobody else has read. So there I was, 83 years old that spring, rattling around a four-bedroom house that Ruth and I had raised Patricia in, going to the grocery store and recognizing nobody, sitting at church in a pew that used to be full and was now just me and an empty space where Dale used to sit. Patricia wanted me to move to Columbus, into one of those senior communities with the activities calendar and the dining hall. I went and toured one. Bingo on Tuesdays, a van to the pharmacy on Thursdays. Everyone in that dining hall was somebody else's parent, waiting out the same thing I was waiting out, and something in me just refused. I didn't want a waiting room. I'd had a whole life. I wasn't ready to spend what was left of it in one. It was Patricia, actually, who first sent me the video. She'd seen something online about older Americans retiring overseas, and she sent it to me half as a joke, I think. Something like, "Look at this crazy stuff, Dad." It was a man about my age sitting on a porch somewhere green and warm, talking about his neighbors, and something about the way he talked, unhurried, easy, surrounded by people, stopped me cold. I watched it twice. Then I found more. Men and women in their 70s and 80s, some of them widowed like me, some of them just done with the cold and the isolation, all of them in the Philippines, all of them talking less about the beaches and more about something else entirely, about being folded into families that weren't their own blood. I watched those videos most nights that whole summer instead of the 10 o'clock news. I told myself I was just curious. 83 years old and curious is a dangerous combination, it turns out, because curiosity, if you let it sit long enough, turns into a decision. I told Patricia I was thinking about it in September, and she was quiet on the phone for a long stretch, then asked me if I'd lost my mind, and I told her I thought I might actually be finding it. I told my doctor. He checked my heart, checked my knees, told me I was in remarkably good shape for 83, and that as long as I had a plan for medications and emergencies, he didn't see a medical reason I couldn't go. That surprised me more than anything. I'd expected somebody to tell me no. Nobody did. I sold the house that winter, sorting through 39 years of Ruth's things and my own, deciding what mattered enough to ship, which turned out to be almost everything except photographs. I kept every photograph. 2 boxes of them, our whole life reduced to 2 boxes I could carry. I flew out of Columbus on a Tuesday in March, 84 years old by then, and Patricia drove me to the airport and cried the whole way. And I held it together right up until security, and then I let myself feel exactly how frightened I was. The flight was brutal, if I'm honest. 20 hours in the air with layovers, my knees swollen by the time I landed in Manila, so disoriented by the time I connected down to Bacolod that I couldn't have told you what day it was. And then I walked out of that small airport into heat that hit me like a hand on the chest. Thick, wet, smelling like diesel and something sweet and flowering all at once. And I stood there with my 2 suitcases thinking, in plain words, what have I done? I want to be honest with you about that first month because I think the videos I watched made it look easier than it was. I had booked a small apartment through an agency, sight unseen, and it was fine, clean, simple, but I knew absolutely nobody. I didn't speak a word of the local language. Simple things, ordering food, figuring out a jeepney, finding a pharmacy that carried my blood pressure medication, took entire mornings and left me exhausted by 2 in the afternoon. The heat wore me down in a way Ohio never had. I'd step outside for 20 minutes and come back needing to lie down for an hour. And in the evenings, alone in that apartment, the loneliness I'd flown 7,000 miles to escape found me anyway. Different scenery, same silence. There was one night, about 3 weeks in, that I nearly booked a flight home. I was sitting on the edge of the bed with my laptop open, looking at return fares, feeling like a fool, an old man who'd made some kind of grand romantic gesture that had nothing underneath it but an empty apartment in a country where he didn't belong. And that's when I heard something outside, a commotion. And I went to the window and saw that the power had gone out across the whole street, which happened more than I expected in those first months. And there were children out on the road with flashlights, laughing, and a woman a few doors down had brought out candles and was calling to her neighbors to come sit while the power was out because it was cooler outside than in. I don't know what made me go down. Maybe just not wanting to sit alone in the dark with a laptop open to a plane ticket? But I went down, and a young man I hadn't met, maybe 30 years old, saw me standing at the edge of the little gathering, looking exactly as lost as I felt. And he pulled a plastic chair over and set it down next to his and said, "Sir, sit, sit, join us," like it wasn't even a question. His name was Ronnie. That was Davina's husband, though I didn't know that yet. I sat in that chair in the dark for almost 2 hours while the whole street talked and laughed about nothing. The power outage, a dog that kept stealing slippers, somebody's cousin's wedding, and nobody made a single thing of the strange old white man who'd wandered down and joined them. Davina brought out a plate of rice and something fried and just handed it to me without a word, the way you'd hand a plate to family. I sat there in a plastic chair with candlelight flickering on everyone's faces, and for the first time since Harold's funeral, I felt the tightness in my chest ease just slightly. I didn't book that flight. I closed the laptop instead. That was a year and 5 months ago now. I moved out of that first apartment within 2 months into a small house 2 doors down from Ronnie and Davina, 12,000 pesos a month, a little over $200, with a mango tree in the yard and a covered porch that catches the breeze. Let me give you the numbers, because they're part of why this works at my age, when a facility back home would have run me $4,000 or $5,000 a month for a room and a bingo schedule. Rent is $210. Electricity, with the air conditioner running at night, about 50. Water is next to nothing. I have a woman named Baby who comes twice a week to clean and do laundry, $40 a month, and who treats it as much as a visit as a job. Groceries and eating out combined run around $150, and I eat better than I did alone in Ohio, where cooking for one had become toast and canned soup. My medications, which cost close to $90 a month, even with Medicare, run about $18 here. All told, my expenses come to around $600 a month. My Social Security covers it with room to spare, and the house sale proceeds sit mostly untouched in savings, which I never expected to say at 84. But the money was never really the point, and I don't want to make it sound like it was. The point is what fills the hours. Every morning I walk down to a small market near the main road. Slow now. My knees don't love it, but I go anyway. And there's a woman named Lorna who sells bananas and mangoes, who has started setting the best ones aside for me because I'm there most mornings and because she told me once, laughing, "You are the only Lolo who comes every single day, so you deserve the good ones." I know the names of a dozen vendors now. I know which one to see for fish and which one for the little seasoning packets I've grown fond of. Twice a week, I sit on my porch in the late afternoon, and Ronnie comes over with a chessboard, an actual physical chessboard, wood, chipped on one corner, and we play while his kids run around the yard, and he beats me most of the time and doesn't let me forget it. His two boys, 6 and 9, have started calling me Lolo Walt without anyone telling them to, and the younger one climbs into my lap most evenings while I'm on the porch and asks me questions about America that I do my best to answer honestly. Davina checks on me most days without making it feel like checking. A knock, a plate, a question about whether I need anything from the market. If I don't answer my door by a certain hour, I've learned somebody eventually comes to see if I'm all right. Not out of obligation, but out of what seems to be an actual, unforced habit of looking out for each other that this whole street seems to run on. I got sick about 8 months in, a bad stomach bug that turned into a fever that had me flat on my back for 4 days. And it was Ronnie who found me when I didn't come down for my morning walk. And it was Ronnie who drove me to the clinic on his motorbike with me holding on to him like a much younger, much more foolish man. And it was Davina who came by twice a day with soup and sat with me in the afternoons because, she said, and I remember this exactly, "You don't have anybody here to do it. So I will. I lay in that little clinic bed thinking about how 8 months earlier, not one person on this island would have known or cared whether I lived or died. And now here was a woman I'd known less than a year, sitting beside me, treating my fever like it was her own family's business. I want to tell you I didn't cry in that clinic bed, but that would be a lie. And I promised myself when I started telling this story that I'd be honest with you. I've been to two fiestas since I arrived, which, if you don't know the Philippines, is something you need to understand because it explains more about this culture than almost anything else could. Every barangay has a patron saint and a feast day. And on that day, the whole neighborhood cooks for 3 days straight and opens every door to anyone who walks by. Family, stranger, doesn't matter. The first fiesta I attended, I tried to bring money to contribute because that felt like the respectful thing to do, the way I'd have done it back home. And Ronnie's mother, a woman probably 10 years younger than me, but sharper than most people half her age, took my hand and closed it and told me, "No, Lolo, you don't pay to come to your own fiesta. You're not a visitor here anymore." And then she put me to work, stirring a pot the size of a bathtub while a half dozen women corrected my technique and laughed at me kindly. The kind of laugh that pulls you closer rather than pushing you away. And I stood there at 84 years old, sweating over a pot of pancit, surrounded by people who had decided, without asking me, that I belonged to them now. I don't want to pretend it's been easy, because that wouldn't be honest either. And I think the men and women my age watching this deserve honesty more than they deserve a postcard. There are still nights I miss Ruth so completely it takes my breath. There are still moments, especially around the holidays, when I think about the Thursday table at the Elks Lodge and I feel the weight of every single one of those 11 funerals all at once. Patricia worries, and I understand why. And I make sure to video call her every Sunday, the same day I used to call Marion, which I don't think is an accident. The heat still wears me down some afternoons. The bureaucracy, the visa renewals, the paperwork is its own particular headache. And at my age, I've had to think hard and plan carefully about what happens if I need serious medical care beyond what the clinics here can offer, which means keeping enough set aside for a flight to Manila or, if it truly came to it, a flight home. I don't take that lightly. Anybody my age considering something like this shouldn't either. But here is what I know now that I didn't know standing in that funeral home in February a year and a half ago. I thought, at 83, that the story of my friendships was over, that I had simply outlived my chance at being known, at mattering to people in that easy, everyday way. I was wrong. I didn't come here looking to replace Harold or Dale or Marion, and I never will, and I don't try to. What I found instead was something I didn't know was still possible at my age, which is that a family doesn't require history to be real. It only requires people willing to show up. Ronnie and Davina and their boys didn't know me as a young man. They never will. But they know me now, today, at 84, sitting on this porch. And it turns out that's enough. It turns out being known now is its own kind of gift, maybe even a better one, because nobody here is comparing me to who I used to be. They just take me as I am. The sun's going down now behind the mango tree. And in a little while, I expect I'll hear that basketball stop bouncing and somebody's grandmother calling everyone in for dinner. And not long after that, Ronnie will probably wander over with that chipped wooden chessboard under his arm, already grinning like he knows he's going to win. Davina left a plate on my porch table 20 minutes ago, still warm under the foil. Down the lane, somebody's radio is playing something with too much bass, and a rooster that has never once respected a normal schedule is making his opinion known from somebody's backyard. I'm 84 years old. I buried my wife. I buried every single friend from a table that used to sit 6 men deep. I flew alone to a country I'd never seen because I was tired of being the last one left, holding the memories with nobody around to make new ones with me. And somewhere between that funeral home in Waverly and this porch with a mango tree in the yard, I found out something I never expected to learn again at my age. That it isn't too late, even now, even after everyone you knew is gone, to be somebody's family. My friends aren't all gone. I just had to fly 7,000 miles to find out where the rest of them had been waiting for me all along.